It is June 5th, 2023, and this is the Civic Union, a collaboration between Access Humboldt and the Department of Communication Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt, uniting the people of the county with their representative government and community helpers. We want to hear from you. You can drop us an email to thecivicunion@gmail.com. You can also tweet us right now at civic_union on Twitter. We will read and respond to appropriate tweets and emails on the air. Why not give it a try? That's at civic_union on Twitter, or the Civic Union, that's all one word, at gmail.com. Today we are talking to Mike Wilson, Humboldt County Supervisor, District 3, representing the cities and unincorporated areas of Arcata, Blue Lake, Manila, Bayside, Fickle Hill, Freshwater, Neeland, Maple Creek, Indianola, and Mitchell Heights. He's one of 5 members of the County Board of Supervisors, which meets on most Tuesdays at 9 a.m. in the board chambers located in the Humboldt County Courthouse in Eureka. He's been a supervisor, as it says, serves here 4-year terms. He was first elected to the Harbor District in 2005, he told me. He was elected to the county board in 2015, started serving in 2016. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to come be in the studio with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, it's really good to have you. The first segment, we just kind of tried to get to know the office a little bit. So we're going to try to get to know the county supervisor's office. Where exactly is your office geographically? Can you describe what it looks like to people on the radio?
Describe what my office looks like. Well, it's in the county courthouse building. So that's where the county office chambers are. So that's where we have our meetings. And if you walk through the front doors there, it's there's the chambers, and our offices are back in the back there. My office is it's about the size of the studio, I guess. It's got a desk, 2 desks actually, and a chair.
There you go. Are you a tidy office person or a messy office person?
Well, I'm a minimalist but messy.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
like a tidy mess kind of thing?
Yeah, well, it gets a little out of control, but about once a week I tidy it up, throw everything into the recycling and move on.
Yeah. It's a good feeling.
Yeah. It's a nice spot actually. It's got windows, which is nice.
Yeah,
and
that's big. What's outside your window?
Oh boy, outside my window is 4th Street.
Okay.
Yeah, and a gas station.
Yeah.
And it's the accompanying noises
that
come with that.
Fumes, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Vocabularies.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
there's a truck shredding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, the sounds of the world here. Very good.
Yep.
So where is your office just in terms of the various levels of local government? Like, how would you answer the question, like, who reports to you and who do you report to as the county supervisor?
Well, let's see. How does it work here? Well, the county governance is definitely different from, say, city governance and then the state, sort of in between. And we're really an administrative arm of the state of California in many ways. So we are governed by the state constitution, and we manage the public trust resources that are of the state. And what I mean by that are with relationship to land management and those sorts of things. And then we also administer all the public health and mental health, programs for the state. And even we do that with our shared jurisdictions with the cities to do a lot of that stuff. And then anything that's outside the cities, we manage land use and roads. And so, the county is bigger than the size of Vermont, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a lot to manage with relationship to the lands, and so yeah, it's a big space to be a part of. It's about, our budget is about a $500 million a year organization.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's not tiny for sure. And much of that, only really $70 million of that is discretionary. And this kind of speaks to how much, what I mean by discretionary, that's like money that we decide by ourselves where that gets spent. The rest of it is administrating programs, really. Mm-hmm. And we have some jurisdictional authority within those spaces, mostly about who we hire and sort of strategically where we might, prioritize. But again, those programs are pretty much, given to us through the state legislature, and then we administer a lot of that stuff. So, that's kind of where we are in that space. And in each of the each of the districts, the 5 districts, has cities within them.
Mhm.
The 5th, which is the northernmost district, has really just Trinidad as a city, but McKinleyville is sort of a large population that is county in the county, and sort of, and planned in that way. And that's why they have discussions a lot in McKinleyville about
Right.
incorporating into a city and those
Right.
sorts of things. Yeah.
Right.
I think, does that frame it up pretty?
It does. What like
Mhm.
percentage of time do you think you spend talking with the city level or
Mhm.
the township level or whatever versus the state level? Is it mostly just the state gives you like a once a
Mm.
year update of here's what you got to do, and then the rest of the time is working to implement it, or do you spend a lot of time going back and forth at both levels?
Well, I kind of put my job in sort of 3 categories. And for, this is a full-time gig. It takes more than full-time work to do,
Yeah.
but and that's just because you could never stop doing it. There's so much to do. And then, so the 3 categories that is sort of like the very local, sort of, I would call the pedestrian level, potholes and neighbor disputes and programs and things that you're doing at the neighborhood level, kind of on a 1-to-1, or maybe with a community group and that sort of thing. And then there's just administering the governance of the county, local government, keeping the wheels on the bus, like holding civil society together, and which is pretty important. And honestly, it's a lot of what we do. And then sort of the third part of that bucket is external advocacy for the county and our programs at both the state and federal level, both like right now when the state is doing a lot of its legislative work. What are we advocating for or against in those processes? But then also budgetary issues, like I was in Washington D.C. a few weeks ago, talking to a lot of different departments there about the offshore wind issues that we see coming, and what
Right.
that means, because the federal government has a lot of interest in that, and so want to make sure that we're represented well in that space. So those are kind of the 3 spaces that, and when you say like how much time, it just really depends on the week and the day.
Okay.
I mean, I almost feel like it is about even in all those spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess it would really depend on like if it's like an election year, even. I don't know. There could be real like seasonal things or yearly things that might change what you have to.
It's definitely it's definitely seasonal. It's for surely our interface with the state is very seasonal. I mean, like right now is like when you're really in, and it's like you think you got all the bills you're interested in, but there's like 1,000, I don't know, maybe there of them, and then one will pop up that you think, I didn't even know that was a bill. It's like, and it's already halfway through the legislative process. That does happen. So like the bills I spend a lot of time in have a lot to do with housing. That's for sure. That's something that's very I work on a lot. But then energy issues, for sure, we're doing a lot of that as well. Environmental issues, healthcare, some of that, and then advocacy around just, again, governance.
I hadn't really thought about county supervisors like doing work in DC. I think that's fascinating and it makes sense. And it was primarily for the wind stuff, you said.
Yeah, it's not that often.
Right.
I mean, maybe once a year
Okay.
on an issue or something that you're advocating for, and there's maybe a delegation that you might go with if you're part of, say, an organization or something like that.
Yeah.
It does happen.
This is KZZH 96.7 FM. We are talking to Mike Wilson, the Humboldt County Supervisor for District 3. Mike, take us through just like a typical day on your job. Like just basically, what time do you get up in the morning and like what do you do to prepare for work?
Okay. So for people who have known me for a long time, I spent a lot of time playing music in my past. So I did have a bit of a rock and roll schedule.
We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, that's the way I put it. It's like I just put it out there. I'm not the earliest of risers necessarily, but I definitely rise a lot earlier than I did in the old days. It's not unusual to get an email from me, 1 a.m. or something like that on any given day. But I try to give myself a little time in the morning, and so like 8:30 is when I'm like to be somewhere. So before that, it's not my jam. Some people, they love to be there at 5 a.m. Not me. But so yeah, I mean, generally speaking, our meetings on Tuesdays start at 9. So I'll be spending the evening before getting prepared for that, but also probably on Friday as well. And then you have to think about like all the events we're probably going to on the weekends and those sorts of things. So I don't know. It's like one of those things. It just doesn't end in some regards. I gotta leave town if I take a vacation, or it's really
Yeah.
hard to hide.
Yeah.
So you go to the store and someone wants to talk to you about the pothole or the issue of whatever it is,
Yeah.
and boy, it really bugs your kids. They cannot stand it.
As a county supervisor, it'd be hard to get off the work site. Like you're kind of perpetually on the work site. That would.
Yeah, it is kind of one of those things, and it's not different. I mean, city council members as well, and I got, shout out to those electeds, because that really is supposed to be a part-time gig. And where I feel fortunate, like mine's considered full-time. I work at it full-time, and like that's where my head is at. I think that oftentimes people ask me whether I support, city council member in some way, shape, or form. Usually it's more about their commitment to showing up and doing the work than it necessarily is totally around their sort of political bent. I mean, that's important to me for sure, but just commitment to, again, civic society and keeping it going is very, very important, especially in this time.
We're going to talk in our third segment here a little bit just about that kind of priority of the local government. You were really excited about that before we got going here.
Yeah.
Very curious just a little bit more about kind of the stuff you go through. I was looking at your Facebook page there, from kinetic to the crabs to all the other things going on right now. This is just a really exciting time. You get to a lot of these events. So it's like a lot of meetings, I would imagine, and phone calls, I would imagine. But you're also just getting out to these events. Like what kind of stuff do you do there when you show up at these?
Well, I mean, I definitely lean towards the things I like to go to.
Fair. Yeah.
And I do have
You
a
got
bit,
a cheer machine at Kinetic. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
right. And I have a bit of an extroverted, personality. So I do derive energy from those interactions. So that's helpful to me. It definitely, that battery can wear down for sure, and I need to like shut down or get out. And maybe you saw from my Facebook page, I'm also a pretty avid paddleboarder.
Oh, cool.
And so that's one of the things I like to break away and do and get to. And I also have to remind some of my fellow electeds as well as myself, like you can't make it to everything. You try. Sometimes it's almost like it feels competitive a bit, just because I don't know what that is about people, but I mean, I like to go to them because that is where you can talk to folks about what they're interested in, what's happening. It's where you really have the real communication. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like you can write op-eds and do that stuff, but the one-on-one and talking to people, that's the most, I don't know, rewarding part about it.
You'd mentioned this already, that it's kind of hard to put the work down. Do you take your work home with you? And if so, like, what does that look like?
Well, a lot of, especially under the COVID paradigm.
Right.
So I think I was like one of the first people that was quarantined. So I had gone to a coastal commission meeting. So one of my other gigs, I guess you'd say, is as a coastal commissioner representing the North Coast. And that was 2020 in March. The chair of the commission got COVID or whatever was announced that he had it. I had been sitting next to him at the meeting.
Wow.
And that was like right at the time when everything shut down. I had just driven my kid up from Santa Cruz.
Sheesh.
Right. And on vacated highways. Right.
Yeah.
And then immediately went into put into my bedroom before everyone else, before everything got shut down.
Yeah.
And started doing meetings from there. But so there's a tendency to take it home. And I mean, it means taking home files and binders and reading and that kind of stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, but again, it's like I got a family, I got things to do. I can't have it run my entire life. And my wife's good at reminding me to like put it down
Good,
and
good.
get
Yeah.
get back into the real world a bit.
I think we kind of glorify working from home too much
Oh yeah,
sometimes. And, of my public service, I want y'all to hustle and work hard. But at the
right.
same time, you need to care for yourselves and your families. And that's a
Yeah,
meaningful distinction to make. So,
yeah.
what kind of like misconceptions do people have about your office, do you think?
Hmm. I think sometimes people think that you have more power than they might, they
This
think
is a
that,
typical response. Yeah, it's a good one.
yeah, I mean, because, and it's like, it's certainly true that you can have influence in certain ways and you work really hard to figure out where that is and how to do that so that you can be, effective
Mhm.
in representing the issues and the interests that you're trying to get to. But ultimately, it's like, I'm on a board of 5 people and I need to count to 3 to get the votes, right?
Yeah.
And I think, where you tend to find the hard parts are really disappointing what you consider maybe your supporters, right? In
Yeah.
terms of like, or people who are, maybe worked really hard to get you elected, but then it's, you know, you're realizing like, I want to move in that similar direction, or even that direction, but it's
Mhm.
like, what can I, what can I get today? How can I move the needle in that space? What's the compromise that needs to be made, to do that? And sort of really, that steady and thoughtful incrementalism is helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, we like the big wins and those are always really great and we work for them, but not to deny ourselves the incremental movements. And frankly, when you're seeing an arc and all that, those incremental movements have a lot more power than sometimes we imagine because they send signals to, say, the institution in general that,
Mhm.
oh, okay, these are the issues that are coming onto the horizon. Staff and other folks or even other electeds can see those things, and it helps move things forward. Whereas if you just kind of like blow it up, then maybe you're not getting that what you need. So I think there's a misconception about like, oh, you're elected, then you're just going to get all the
Make it
things.
happen.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I'd also think that part of it is, and for us, it's, people think you have direct power over all the staff within the
Mm.
institute. And we have 2,000 people that work for the organization, which is Humboldt County as the county itself.
Wow.
And, they have, their directors and the people that they work for within that space. And we really only should be directing the directors.
Mm.
When we start telling what we call like line staff
Right.
what to do, that's very confusing
Mm.
to people. It's not fair. It doesn't make for a healthy work environment.
Right.
So, as good employers, we, try to not get involved at that level, even though we're in those spaces getting information and being there. It's a balance. You really want to be respectful of the workforce.
Sure. Other
Mhm.
folks too talk a lot about what it means sometimes to just get word from the state that this is what's happening. And
Yeah.
you could be very against it and your constituents are against it. And there's
Yeah.
just not a lot you can do all of the time to
Hmm.
push back on that.
Hmm.
I caught another interview of yours and I really appreciated this. I'm an old debate coach.
Hmm.
And you said that like it's hard because you'll sit there and you'll think about different policies and at the end of the day you get to vote yes or you have to vote no,
Yeah.
and that's your vote, and
Right.
you don't always feel like a yes or a
Right.
no. And in
Hmm.
debate I'm like I have to say affirmative one or negative one, and sometimes I can't say either of those things are true, but
Hmm.
we got to go on record saying one of those two things.
Yeah.
Like how do you like navigate that space and deal with that complexity? Like what's that like?
It's really, it's, if you have any sort of self-reflection,
Mhm.
it's actually pretty hard.
This is one of those things you take home with you sometimes, at least in
Sometimes
my line of work. Yeah.
I've there's been votes that I've voted yes on, and like literally a day later I'll like out loud, no. Like,
Can I ask you for an example? Can I press you on that?
no,
All right, fair
I'm
enough.
not gonna go into that space
All
right now.
right, fair enough.
A little
A
PTSD.
little too soon. Yeah. Put it in your memoir.
Exactly. I mean, there are, I mean, and it's not because you feel like I've done the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's just like it's just like so many decisions in your life. Sometimes you have to try a decision on,
Right.
in those, did I buy the right car? Did I do, was this the right decision?
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It's like this false binary that we have to deal with, this false dichotomy oftentimes, that even our political system is just set up in because of, frankly, math,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we just set up this algorithm that made two parties, and there's really no a way around that. And likewise, these decisions are also these sort of dichotomous decisions. But that's where I was talking about, where the nuance of trying to move the needle. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm going to get to a yes, even though I don't maybe like it, if I can pull a layer of decision making into that space, then great. We were able to move that forward. Maybe I got a policy that inserted into a larger project that we can work on later. And so that definitely happens a lot. And that's part of the strategy of kind of, of this governance that we live in.
It feels so blunt with yes or no.
It really does. And people want to hold you like, you voted yes on this, you voted no on this thing. It's like,
you're
true.
a full supporter of these kinds of things. And it's like, it is complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is KZZH 96.7, and we are talking to Mike Wilson, Humboldt County Supervisor for District 3. Mike, what kinds of things like really motivate you to go to work every day? Is there something that really gets you fired up, or some kind of project you're working on right now, or just general worldview that you ascribe to?
The worldview. Let's see. Well, I I think the value of local governance, and for one, I just love the people that value what it is. I mean, some people get very jaded, or just don't feel that local governance is meaningful to them. In the like early 90s, I traveled from Asia to Europe overland, and it was like my walkabout, I guess you call it. And it took me, I don't know, over a year. But part of that was traveling through the former Soviet republics at about the 1 year mark, where it had all fallen apart.
Wow.
And it was complete chaos. I mean, it was. So when people say like, I hate government, it's like, well, I think you should go to a place where there's no government and see what that really looks like. It was scary. I mean, honestly, well, I was probably, I was 25 or something at the time. And so I didn't even know how scary. Looking back, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I was traveling through this insanity. But it's full of gangs and drugs and guns and prostitution, and it's just, I mean, and in ways that are just very scary, right? And and shortages, and people taking advantage of every thing that they can with in these communities, and people were just really scared, right? And I really appreciate, when I returned to Humboldt County, which is where I grew up, is in Humboldt County. I spent some time away, but this is where I grew up. I just really began and working as an engineer, which was my profession, and doing that kind of work. It just made me really appreciate that governance. And I was elected to the Harbor District in 2005 and started in 2006. And I did that mostly because it's a harbor recreation and conservation district, and I am a environmental engineer, and I want to see more restoration around Humboldt Bay. I'm very interested in estuarine restoration work, and so I got into that. But really, after doing that for 10 years, I really realized as an engineer that these systems that we work in, they're like ecosystems. Sometimes they're like ecosystems, as Supervisor Madrone would call it. And but they're the systems by which we function and try and prosper and deliver, happiness and health
Mhm.
to our community members. And this is where it happens. It's at the local level.
Mhm.
This is why, we were talking before this interview about how I sometimes talk about the value of local votes and local governance,
Mhm.
and how a citizen's involvement or even just education around their local issues is exponentially more powerful than their involvement in national politics. And that's not to say that national politics are not really, really important,
Right.
and have a whole bunch of really important issues.
Yeah, especially right now.
Yeah, especially right now. But understanding that the construct of everything around you was made by local decision makers.
Mhm.
This room that we're sitting in on this campus of CR, the location of where CR is at, and all of that was fundamentally done by local decision makers of those times. The streets, the way they're laid out, why your water is clean, and why and the issues around your transportation systems, and both the good and bad, they're
Yeah.
all predicated around the team that you vote for. You vote for a team that both administers and seeks out the grant money and brings it back and does all that stuff. And then that's your crew that's helping you, your community do all that and represent. And you can vote for people that don't do that very well, or you can vote for people that do that well. And ultimately, your vote is at the local level can be like 1 or 2 votes, that make a difference between who is or who isn't in those offices. I mean, I have a very good friend of mine as a supervisor in San Luis Obispo County. 14 votes.
Wow.
And it was pivotal. I mean, it was like between whether it was going to be a red county or a blue county, and they had redistricting, craziness that they were dealing with, and all kinds of stuff. And so and that county's pivotal to whether or not they were going to be part of a larger, energy consortium. There's just all these things that really were predicated on 14 votes, which is really 7 people.
Right.
Yeah. And so,
right. Yeah.
right. So that's not that nothing happens at the national level that way. Although as we know, that the last national election was teetered on 20,000 votes in one district, but it's just, it matters, right? But
it really does.
That local votes, they really are important.
Dr. Aaron Donaldson, and you are listening to KZZH 96.7 FM Eureka. We're also streaming on kzzh.accesshumboldt.net. Access Humboldt is local voices through community media. It is June 5th, 2023, and we are talking to Mike Wilson, Humboldt County Supervisor for District 3. We just finished talking a little bit about the role of your office and government and all of that. Now we just kind of want to get to know you a little bit more. You said that you were born here in Humboldt County. Where were you born?
I was not born here in Humboldt
County. Okay. Where were you born?
I was raised. I was born in the VA hospital at Stanford. Yeah, in Palo Alto.
Okay. And when did you come to Humboldt County?
We moved to Humboldt County in, I'm gonna say 78, maybe somewhere around there. Yeah, moved. My my mom and her husband, my stepdad, is still my stepdad, moved here. I think 78. We were down the Bay Area. She was actually a doctor at Stanford. She was the first woman on the medical faculty there. You can imagine it was challenging.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, and she had, I guess you'd say, trailblazed enough.
Yeah.
And they decided that Humboldt County would be a great place to go. Okay. And so we moved up. We actually lived in Richardson's Grove for a summer while looking for a place in Southern Humboldt. So I grew up in the Southern Humboldt area.
Okay.
And dropped out of South Fork after my I think my sophomore year, and moved to Arcata.
Okay.
And got into the through the EOP program, got into Humboldt State at the time, because I was an upward bound student.
Oh, cool.
And so then what happened after that? I don't know. Well, okay, so I was at Humboldt State for a few years. It turned out they didn't have a major in punk rock. I thought that was what I was going to school for, but yeah,
it's overdue, by the way,
exactly.
and we're still pushing for it every single year. And
So,
weirdly, it's still not there.
Yeah,
but
so I moved to San Francisco State, and after 5 major changes, I settled on civil engineering and got a civil engineering degree there, and worked for some international engineering firms, mostly doing cleanup of military bases and refineries around the Pacific Rim area. So like Guam, up into Washington and in Southern California, and
call those like brown spots. Sometimes we read about those
brownfields.
Yeah, brownfields.
And
they are nasty.
Yeah. Nice. Well, these were pretty brutal. This is more than anyways, there was a lot of work on that. Then I saved up some money after doing all that, and did some little bit of travel, and then came back to Humboldt State to do a master's program in environmental systems engineering.
Okay.
And then was done with that, started got married, and then started a business. Actually worked for the county for a little bit in environmental health, but then started a business doing environmental consulting work, working on mostly tribal organizations for United Indian Health Services, doing the Potawat Health Village, Wiyot tribe, doing Indian Island restoration work, and then municipalities. And then then got elected to Harbor District, and then eventually supervisor. So yeah.
Do you have any first political memory? I tell people weirdly, I remember seeing George H.W. Bush taking the oath of office. And as a kid, I was like, that guy was president, and now that guy is president now. And that for me was like a moment in politics where I kind of understood how politics worked. And I'm not in politics, but I, talk a lot about it in the work that I do. And it's a question I always ask people, because
I came from a really political family.
Yeah, right.
So I almost feel like my first memory that I can, even though I didn't know it was political at the time, was my mom was doing flyers for the ERA movement, for the equal rights stuff. And I remember I was like sitting under a desk as like a kid, and I was like doodling on the flyers, and it caused all kinds of problems. But for me, I think I was in high school, and as just a young punk rocker, we were it was all about the anti-nuclear movements, and we were protesting down at Lawrence Livermore and those in those times, part of those peace movements and stuff. So I think I remember when Reagan was elected.
Yeah, punk had a lot to say about that.
Yeah, exactly. That was the bands I was listening to, the Dead Kennedys and all that stuff. And even the first show I think I played was with them in Arcata, like, I don't know, a long time ago. So I was always kind of steeped in that tradition. My grandparents were, union people. Way back.
The punk community built a skate park in my hometown of Helena, Montana, which was a pretty conservative town. They didn't want a skate park there. And so I look at punk rock as a political motivating force in my life too, in a lot of ways.
Well, the skate park in Arcata was a brainchild of Vic Farrow, who was a young punk rock drummer who actually ended up getting killed by a car while skateboarding. But it was in there too.
It's a pretty famous park in a lot of ways. We've got family from Missouri or Mississippi, and they skated it, and we're excited about that. So that's pretty cool. So this is a fun question. Why did you get into local politics? Why would you do politics?
Well, I think I'll have to go back to that time when I got elected onto the board of the Harbor District, and I honestly I didn't, and I just didn't even think I was going to win. To be really clear, I was just like running because I thought that the issue of doing restoration work around Humboldt Bay was cool, and and I had like one. I called my friend Rob, who was my campaign manager, who didn't have a phone, a a, a car, or a computer, and I had like one volunteer, and so I was surprised that I won that election. And I didn't actually, even that night, I didn't even have a party, because I thought, why would I want to have a pity party? So I
Right.
was like, that was going to be terrible.
Yeah.
So I got into that space, and I was definitely, I had beaten an incumbent, a long-term incumbent, in an organization that was really sort of steady in what it was doing. Um I was I wasn't, they didn't want me there very much. It was just I was just an outsider. I mean, I suppose. And maybe luckily for me at that time, as a young person, I sort of derived some sort of, at that point, some sadistic pleasure from the discomfort of those around me. Very, that punk
Sounds punky.
attitude.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah,
punk themes here.
yeah, sort of in that space. I definitely am not in that space anymore. What I really learned from that whole experience was it's a lot easier to throw stones than it is to stack them.
Mm.
And it is
Mm.
just so much easier to be critical in those spaces, and to say everything sucks, and
Yeah.
all that thing, which I was really good at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah.
And people will follow you all the way to do that.
Yeah.
But then there comes a time when maybe the winds change, and suddenly there's a few allies on a board, and you realize, oh crud, I'm on the majority of this organization, and suddenly you actually got to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more work in
Yeah.
that space, and it's great work, and it's fun and exciting. And that's then motivated me to kind of move into those spaces, and do the work within the community like that. Getting onto the board of supervisors again, I would say politically in the minority
Mm.
at that time, but I think I had a lot more experience about how to, I was talking about moving the needle and finding those spaces where we can make incremental movements forward, because sometimes that's all you get.
Right.
And 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 eh, and if you're the best at doing even just that, then I think you're making progress. And I just I I just really like so many of the people
Mm.
in local government, because I really feel like everyone wants the same thing: health and happiness and stability within these communities, for everyone to thrive. And it's just like that show, what's a Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
That exuberance
Trying
and
to
that
think if there's a
enthusiasm.
county supervisor in that show. I'm not sure. I'll have to go looking.
Well, there aren't county supervisors, but it's a city council or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even the most villainous quote
Yeah.
unquote of them still has like things they want to get done.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. And it's
Yeah.
just so interesting, and just that Leslie Knope sort of like vibe of, that inspiration, yet having to work within the clunky environment that is humans.
Mhm.
Right. And
Yeah. I mean, that disagreement is supposed to be what democracy is kind of all about. And
yeah, I mean, I have to remind people all the time, like, it's like, we disagree. That's why there's 5 of us, or that's why
Yeah.
there's multiples of us,
Yeah.
is because we have those disagreements. That's the point.
You're listening to KZZH 96.7. This is the Civic Union, and we're talking to Mike Wilson, who's the Humboldt County Supervisor for District 3. Mike, I'm wondering if you're in your time in government, you've seen a shift just in the way people communicate. I feel like it's gotten obviously just like more extreme. People have gotten more maybe cynical, maybe apathetic, maybe just mean. I think there's just a cruelty in politics that we see now. And I'm just curious if you see that in your life, or if you kind of see the opposite. I've asked this question of a couple folks sitting here, and they all kind of come back with like they're really pumped about the nature of most of the people they communicate with. I'm curious where you're at on
I
that.
think most of the people I communicate with, I feel, are very respectful.
Yeah.
And sure, there's a few folks. I will say, I mean, I really do. I think I observe that a lot of the really toxic behavior is focused, I have to say, onto or at the female
Yeah.
Folks I work with,
Right.
more than that's why I really see that. And then it's painful. Like, I mean, it's just like, how are these people? I see people speak in ways to our, female city council members and supervisors in ways I don't experience. I don't, I
Right.
mean, and I think there are certain liberties that people feel like, I don't know what that is. Well, I mean, I know, yeah, I mean, obviously it's sexism in
Yeah.
all kinds of ways, but it's been more pronounced lately, that differential that I've seen more of, and it's very disturbing to me. I really, that part really, it grosses me out. But again, those are relatively few people.
Right.
Um, and for the most part, yeah, there's like a lot of excitement. I mean, there's hard times in this work too. I mean,
Yeah.
we're having to go through some pretty heavy duty budget discussions coming up, and those are just so not fun. Ugh,
Right.
Sometimes we have some, pretty strong battles around land use issues. Tomorrow we're going to talk about short-term rentals and sign ordinances and those sorts of things. And, there's a lot of disagreements about those. And sometimes you get a little heartburn with that, but again, I just, it's overwhelming the amount of good people that you get to work with, I think, in the space.
Could be a pretty straightforward segue. What would you say to folks that are considering careers in politics? Is there any message out there that you would send to those people that are like, I've thought about running for something?
I just wouldn't start with the running part. I would start with the get on a committee part, really, to see if like the procedures are your jam.
It's a lot of procedures.
Yeah, and also like, how do you feel about sitting in a meeting that sometimes you're just like rolling your eyes because it's just going forever, and sometimes it's really exciting. I mean,
Right.
I'm just gonna say, like, sometimes
Right.
you really are like, oh my god,
It's not all fireworks.
exactly, this is going on forever for some certain things, and then other things you're just like, bring it on, load me up here. But I think like getting on a committee of any kind, or even going to those committee meetings at that level, where you might have, where your input, again, it's like the smaller the government thing, the more your input is like of value and is reflected in the direction and the arc of that thing. And so like a Parks and Rec committee, or pick a thing that you're or even like a nonprofit that you're like really into, and does this Robert's Rules of Order, can you you want to do that? Do you want to sit through hours of people giving you comments about whatever it is and listen to that intently and process that and those sorts of things? And so I would always start at the committee level and see if it's your thing, and then also running for office, even if you feel like you may or may not win the thing, or you learn a lot just running. And especially if you're like, if you're respectful in that process and understand that even if you disagree with people, that they're doing it most likely for reasons that they think are really good reasons, and they think are really good for the community. And you will learn a lot. I mean, even if you don't win, it's like taking a college course in how to market and campaign and all the human drama in those spaces. Or work on a campaign, I think is really great. Volunteer in those spaces. Again, those are really, find people you like to be around and work with. And
a lot of networking I've learned just in politics and campaigning is just learning who's who. And
some people are, they're, like me, I have a lot of extroverted personality traits. Some people are not that way. And they find their space in maybe being the treasurer of the campaign, or doing other things that they can not, be up front, but they want to be involved. So there's a lot of ways. And then just working in local government too, I think they're great jobs.
Yeah.
Honestly. I mean,
meaningful jobs too.
I think they are meaningful. I mean, sure, there are bureaucracies. You get more than 5 people together, you create a bureaucracy.
Yep.
Seriously, like, and so having your expectations be realistic about that, but getting into local government, because if you are a person who really wants to see positive change in your community, just being in it and doing it was really, really helpful. Yeah.
Welcome back to the Civic Union, a collaboration between Access Humboldt and the Department of Communication Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt, uniting the people of the county with their representative government and community helpers. I'm Dr. Aaron Donaldson, and today we're talking to Mike Wilson, who is the Humboldt County Supervisor for District 3. Mike, just really appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. This last bit we want to dedicate to just one of the biggest problems that we're facing right now is housing. It's something that you pretty much spent a lot of your time talking about, and the other interviews that I've listened to and things. Just you were talking before we got started about just the nature of the housing crisis, how it's not just a lack of buildings, you said, but that we're like losing buildings and things like that. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit on like the problem that we face as you see it?
Yeah. There's a whole host of issues that sort of converge to make what we have as a housing crisis right now. And I also want to emphasize that our housing crisis is part and parcel or very connected to our climate crisis.
Yeah. I appreciate this point. You make it regularly.
Yeah, they're very connected, because where we live and how we live is connected to our transportation systems and our food systems, and that is really in Humboldt County, that's more than half of our carbon output is just around moving stuff and us around, and that has a lot to do with how and where we live and those sorts of things, and so that's a big part of that. And then also how we heat our houses, how the electrification issues and natural gas and all those those energy systems around housing. So it's really important that we understand there's that connectivity between that. And then also a lot of our social issues and all those things about how safe it is to, say, walk in your community or get to school and those sorts of things. And, up until recently, I mean, unfortunately for most of us, I mean, that I guess it's, for kids, until just recently, guns became the number one killer of kids. That is just like, and I'm not going to even get into that space right now. But the next thing is car accidents and getting hit by vehicles, and basically around vehicles is kind of the next big thing, and how safe people feel in their communities moving around. So those are all really important issues around that. But so the housing patterns that we have created in sort of the Western United States and then has sort of emanated around the world is what we call that single family zoning.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are really familiar with this concept. It's like that suburbanization, and it was very
picket fence
and just like the one house per lot sort of situation.
Right.
And it's interesting because I know that some of my real estate friends would be like, oh well, it's the freedom to build these things, and really those paradigms were created under restrictions, because what was happening is they were restricting to just that type of development. And it's basically what was considered started in places like the city of Berkeley and other places as exclusionary zoning.
Yeah.
Right. So they created these zoning areas. They said you can only build in this model because it would exclude people who live in multifamily housing.
Right. It's kind of economic redlining in a lot of ways.
It was economic redlining.
Yeah.
And so that's what created it. And so what's happened is over the last 50, 60, 70 years is that we've created these systems where 80% of even our urban areas are these single family zones. But what's happening within those spaces is the housing is older now,
Right.
but more than that, the infrastructure is older.
Mm-hmm.
And so with these lower densities and this old infrastructure and the older housing, with what used to be a one income earner would then you'd have another person help take care of the house and all that stuff. Now it's two incomes, and now it's hard for people to even take care of these houses. Now they're buying these houses that are already old.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then now the sewers are old and they all have to be redone. And now the electrical systems are burning everything down. And,
Right.
Right. So it's like you have these systems that are really stressed, and you have less tax payers in those spaces, and you have smaller families, so there's actually less people in those spaces. And all that started to create scarcity in housing, in that, we weren't keeping up with building outside that, so then that created scarcity.
Wow. Yeah.
So when that scarcity occurred, that made housing more of a commodity.
Yeah.
Right. So when that happened, then people and corporations and started buying housing as a commodity,
Just for renting it.
not just for renting it, but also just to hold it.
Oh.
So vacancy rates actually in many places went up because there was not motivation to rent it necessarily if you were buying it at a price where that prices are going up and inflating.
Okay.
So there's that too. So people are buying second homes,
Like speculating on
second homes, vacation homes.
Right.
So in places like, I'm on the coastal commission, so in the coastal zone, this is really happening really fast. And then the explosion of the short-term rental came, which is the Airbnb. So we are losing housing to all these mechanisms where we're it's not just losing housing, we're actually just creating vacancies. Right.
Yeah.
So we're creating vacancies faster than we can replace them to build housing. So we're creating then more scarcity, and the prices go up even more. And that it's concentrated even in places where people want to be, right?
Yeah.
We're in desirable spaces. And then this is part of that climate issue. Then your workforce has to live farther away and drive in and commute in, and you're creating more traffic and parking issues and all that stuff. So we really have created a housing crisis, by a lot of this stuff. So it's not just the need to build housing, which I think is very important. We do need to build more housing, and certainly multifamily. That's where I feel like we need to do more of or concentrate on. I think we need to build all kinds of housing, but where we prioritize is, I believe, in how we can build more densification in our housing, where we can build second units, where we can start talking about raising height limits and reducing parking requirements and those sorts of things, so that we can actually get to, and all of those things are actually property rights. Like we're actually reducing the thing that so again, like it's funny, sometimes I get into it with some of my more conservative real estate people, and they're like, no, you can't get rid of parking requirements. I'm like, it's just a requirement. It's a regulation. You keep saying we need to get rid of regulations. Well, this is a regulation, and I'm saying let's get rid of it. And they're like, so it's often it's one of those things. There's a lot of legislation on this. We're seeing, recently with Senate Bill 9, which allowed for accessory dwelling units, and which was very popular. But the reason the state did that is because us at local decision makers have a really hard time making that kind of decision for our community, that kind of policy.
Interesting.
And so that's why you see so much legislation happening now at the state level, because the local decision makers, and it has a lot to do with, if you think about, what is the construct or who's on the decision-making policy, especially around short-term rentals. It's like, if you look at who's on your planning commission, well, probably property owners, and probably people who rent property, and who's on your city council. And I'm one of those people. I have property, and I have a rental myself. Like, it's like I am in the class, right, of that, in that space, a rental, but it's like, but I'm just saying, it's like, that's that interest in general can do a lot of driving of those policies, and where the renting folks are, they're not necessarily in the decision-making process as
Right.
much.
I
So
tell I tell the story on the air here sometimes, and to my students a lot. I moved here to take a job at Cal Poly, and about 24 hours before we moved here, our plan was to live at a campground
yeah.
because we couldn't find anywhere to rent that we
Hmm.
could afford.
Hmm.
And we were literally going to live at a campground, and I was going to teach at Cal Poly. And then
Right.
when we were sitting on the airplane to fly here, I got a note that said that the people that rented the house that we applied for didn't want it. And so they gave it to us. And when we got there, we realized why they didn't want it, because there's like mushrooms growing out of the wall.
Hmm.
And one of the walls on the inside got so swollen it popped the towel rack off of the wall. And so you're talking about losing housing and the
Right.
kind of economic forces that
Right.
drive this market in Arcata, especially. It feels like it's brutal. It's like, and they just expanded the number of students coming to Cal Poly, which feels like it's creating more vacancies. Like, is this trending in the right direction, you think? Or are we in
Well,
front of the wave or behind the wave? I mean, in either case, we keep paddling, but
yeah, I mean, Arcade has been done a really good job of building new housing.
yeah.
And that has a lot to do with the general plan policies of 20 years ago. And there
Okay.
was a big battle about that.
Hmm.
And there was this idea that it was too prescriptive at the time, that and the developer said, we can't build anything because there's too many rules in this space. But in that incident, in that space, in that, what it did is it removed the uncertainty.
Right.
So the developers realized, well, okay, if this is the rules and I know what they are, then let's do that. Sometimes when I mean, this is the other side of the coin about removing certain rules or certain regulations, is that you can create uncertainty.
Hmm.
And so then you're negotiating everything. You're
Right.
negotiating, what the fees are for parking, or what the fees are for this or that, or playgrounds and blah blah blah. But if you are very prescriptive, then you know what it is and you can get it done. And so the City of Arcata did a really good job in that general plan process. And the City of Eureka, in their new general plan, um, made a lot of allowances for certain expansion of development in a lot of different ways. And now you're seeing those discussions, like there's proposals for projects, and then they're really happening
Hmm.
in those spaces. I really think that um, you I think that both Eureka and Arcata are seeing some very progressive policies being promoted in that space. It's a little more difficult in a county because the cities are where the infrastructure is,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so we're trying to figure out ways to work together, cities and counties now, to sort of blend our responses to housing. And that has been challenging, but also inspiring, in that a lot of other rural communities are doing the same thing now. It used to be very like, you would look at housing as an obligation that you didn't want, and you were trying to fight the state at every level. Now we're seeing more and more people are realizing that housing is actually more of an opportunity,
Yeah.
that you actually need the people and the economic drivers that they bring into a community to keep the infrastructure going and to keep the businesses going. So these are challenges, and it's fun.
We've just got like one more minute. I just wanted to ask you, like, what is your time frame in terms of when you think this might get better? Do you have an answer to that question? Like, do you think you're seeing differences now that are really meaningful? You think it's going to be 5 years before we start seeing a difference in, obviously, inflation and all of this can be. How do you see the time frame looking?
Well, it took us 70 years to get into this place.
Right? Yeah.
So
So turn it
but
around in two.
I think in the next 20 years, we're going to see a lot of big and then it's like 20 years goes by fast. You
It
know
does.
this, right?
Yeah.
And I do feel like that we are in a positive arc with relationship to a lot of those things. I think the young people are really inspiring and changing minds about what our expectations are and can be. And
Yeah.
so I'm looking forward to
More
doing
people
what I
involved at
can.
the local level for sure seems to be happening around here. That
Oh,
makes a
yeah,
difference. So, well,
definitely.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really great.
This has been the Civic Union. It's a collaboration between Access Humboldt and the Department of Communication Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt, uniting the people of the county with their representative government and community helpers. Once again, we do want to thank our guest, Mike Wilson, Humboldt County Supervisor for District 3. Thanks also to my producer, Nate Dogg, here in the studio for all of his collaborative efforts. We will be back July 3rd, continuing our conversation with members of the Eureka City Council. Next time, we'll be talking to Katie Moulton, who represents Ward 2 in the city of Eureka. Up next is one of my favorite shows here on KZZH. Certified animal behaviorist Charlotte Peltz gives you tips, tricks, and tools to make it work with that roommate who poops in the kitchen. It's living with your dog. Thanks for listening and stay unified.